Well, good afternoon, everybody. Today is April 7th, I think, April 7th. And today we're doing our Supervised Parenting Time webinar. I'm really excited today to introduce my two guests. Michelle Younger is a partner at Jaffe, right? And she's been at Jaffe for 4 years. But before she was an attorney at Jaffe, she practiced law in New York. And her job was with the New York City Legal Aid Society, where she represented children in abuse and neglect cases, child custody and parenting time cases, and in juvenile delinquency proceedings. So Michelle brings a wealth of experience to the table. We also have, I'm so excited to introduce Arlene Platt. She is a supervisor who does supervised parenting time. And I personally have never met one before, so it's kind of that I knew of at least because I do appeals. So it's not like something I would normally deal with. So I'm just really excited to hear Arlene's input today. Now, Arlene has been a supervisor for parenting time for over 20 years, and she has also been a therapist for over 30 years. She got her degree from the University of Michigan and has a lot of experience and probably some anecdotes to share with us today. So thank you everybody for coming, especially Michelle and Arlene. And for the people in the audience, just remember, I'm going to do my best to monitor the chat and the Q&A, so you can put questions in Q&A, or you can share information on the chat if you want everybody to see it. And I think you just need to be careful because it's set so that it automatically sends the chat to host and panelists only. But you just click a button if you want everyone to see your chat. If you're trying to share information with us about your experiences, we'd love to hear them. So, and as always, if there's a question we can't get to or aren't able to answer today, we will do our best to reach out to you after the fact. So don't hesitate to ask a question, and don't feel bad if we don't get to your question, but we certainly are going to make our best effort to get the questions answered today. So I think what the best way to start today is to talk about what kind of cases are we seeing where supervised parenting time might be justified, or where, making the request for supervising parenting time, or in the alternative where we as an attorney should be anticipating that the other side is going to be asking for supervised parenting time. And I'm going to throw the ball first to Michelle, but of course, Arlene, you can pipe in whenever you want to. Michelle, do you have some thoughts about the kinds of cases that we are going to see this in?
I do, and thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's wonderful to be here. I would say that primarily now I practice in divorce cases and family law, not as much the abuse and neglect world anymore, but I would expect it in an abuse and neglect case, depending on the allegations, a case of excessive corporal punishment, drug abuse, mental health issues, and a lot of that may carry over to the divorce world as well. In my family law practice in the divorce world, I would expect it in cases of severe mental illness, a parent who maybe there was excessive corporal punishment, if there's a criminal case pending against the parent, a parent who maybe has spent some time in jail, who hasn't seen the children in quite some time. And
can I pause you for a second with the criminal
Sure.
case? Does it matter what kind of criminal case it is? I mean, is it need to be something related to the abuse of the child, or do you have any experience with cases where the one parent is subject to criminal allegations?
So I have cases where it's been for maybe domestic violence that was perpetrated in front of the child. The child was exposed to it. Obviously, there's concerns then of anger management, of the parent's ability to control himself or herself in front of the children, how that may translate, even if there hasn't been allegations of excessive corporal punishment against the children, but we're concerned that that may happen. Understandably, the other parent who is the victim might be very concerned and would not want the spouse having unsupervised parenting time.
Right.
So,
go ahead.
I have seen it requested in other cases where a parent, it was a nonviolent offense, but had been in jail for quite some time. There's major trust issues. The parent has to come back, rehabilitate, reintegrate into the community, and where maybe there'd be a period of short-term supervision just so that everyone is comfortable again, because it may have been
basically because the child doesn't even really know the parent. Is that kind
right.
of the feel for it? Okay. And I've also seen it where one party is asking to completely suspend the other parent's parenting time. And I've seen it where the judge maybe hasn't felt comfortable with a complete suspension of parenting time. And so instead, they do it as an alternate. They do supervised parenting time so that somebody can report back to the court, I guess. And I say that I don't know what happens to those reports. And I think maybe Arlene and Michelle both can help us out with that in a few minutes. That's
Sure.
like the next phase. Arlene and we do have a question, but I want to let Arlene answer that question. If you have other types of cases where you've seen it, where we should expect it to be an issue that somebody's going to be wanting supervised parenting time.
Well, thank you. First of all, again, thank you for having me. I feel very honored and privileged. Thank you. So yes, so to work in tandem with what was just said, if it's something where the children or the parent that has had a custody of the children or child or children, and they feel that they are at risk in any way, shape, or form, that's where a court-appointed supervisor comes into place. So it could be a therapeutic supervisor or a supervisor that is trained. I do therapeutic supervision because I am a social worker, but there are not, I mean, it's not necessary. I mean, unless it's court appointed for them to have therapeutic supervision. Otherwise, they can have a supervisor in place for a designated period of time, hours that are appointed by a judge, attorneys, or a mediator. So that is monitored and is done by the legal system. I do not put that together. I don't put the hours, the days, or anything like that. I do not have the authority to do so. That is put upon by the legal system.
Arlene, can you tell us?
After every session, I do a report as to how the parent that is that has to have the supervision. I do a written report and hand it over to the attorneys so that they know that the child or children are not at risk. I never leave the child or children ever. They are always in my eye view, my purview, and hear what I can hear and what I can see. And that's very important that they know that their child is never at risk. That's very important to let it be known that they are always monitored and they are always safe.
Arlene, can you just really quickly tell us what therapeutic supervision is versus another kind of supervision?
Sure, of course. So if a judge or an attorney or a doctor feels that having a parent, or if there's been any kind of abuse or neglect, or if the child feels unsafe, or the parent feels that the child or children are unsafe, and they are in counseling or they are in therapy or whatever it might be, that they feel that they're afraid to be with that parent and they're hesitant or will not go, but they feel that they will have some benefit to counseling or help and support in conjunction and with going to that parent, and you can have some guidance and support with therapy in conjunction with having supervision. I can provide that as well. And I can help that parent if they do anything improper or say anything inappropriate or behave inappropriately. I can help that parent at that time to tweak it or monitor or be more effective as a parent, and to do some, help with their parenting skills, or help them to do to help them with their skills and with their whatever issues might be happening at that given time, versus just monitoring the safety of the child, or monitoring how they are as a parent, or monitoring their so-called reintegration period. I can help with the facilitation of the ongoing process.
So we have a lot of really great questions, and I know I have some that I already prepared, but I want to make sure we get to the people in the room first. So first of all, one of the questions was, who pays for the supervisor? Is it the court? And I suspect it might be different based on the county, but you don't think you think it's the parents are paying for the supervisor?
From my experience, if I may speak, from my experience, it's the parent that is having the sessions.
Who needs the supervision?
Correct.
Michelle?
I mean, I have seen it where it's both parents. The parents will equally share in the cost. One parent might be requesting it. The other one says, well, I don't think I need supervised parenting time. Why should I pay for that? and they might argue back and forth. So it will be split between the parents, or sometimes it's paid, via a percentage based on their income and who can afford more.
Now, of course, if we're
Correct.
we're talking about in the context of a custody case, if we're talking about DHHS and a child protective proceeding, I do believe that those supervisors are provided by the court, because that's part of the obligation to make reasonable efforts to reunify the parent and the child. And the reason I bring that up is because I think some of the attorneys in our audience today do both family law and child welfare. So I want to make sure we're making the distinction. So a couple other questions came up related to that. One comment, Mara Brennan, thank you for your comment, your question. She has noticed that sometimes courts, at least in the context of child protective proceedings, are requiring supervision for the parent who is the victim of domestic violence. And she asked, is there a legal justification for that? My off the cuff instinct is no, but Michelle, you worked I know different laws apply in New York, but if either one of you have thoughts about the victim of domestic violence being required to be supervised, can you think of a reason why that would be the case?
So often the domestic violence cases that I would see, if there was a parent who was the victim, they would be called the non-respondent parent, and the neglect case was usually brought against the abuser, against the other parents. So there were no restrictions on that parent's parenting time. Sometimes that parent may be a respondent if maybe they fail to protect, or there's other issues going on and we don't know. So if it's just because of domestic violence, I would say that that's maybe not that legal. I don't know, but I'd imagine that it's more complicated, and maybe there's a failure to protect, or they instigated as well in front of the child, and there's more going on that we don't know about, or there's other issues that move beyond the domestic violence.
Right.
Arlene, have you seen that happen, where the victim of domestic violence is being supervised?
I have not.
Okay. And Maura, I wanted to point out to you, and I know this is more on the child welfare side, but there's what I call the doctrine of anticipatory failure to protect, where a parent who can't protect themselves from domestic violence has their rights terminated because the court anticipates that they can't protect their child from domestic violence when they can't protect themselves. I don't think there's a published case on that, but I've seen courts use it, and I've been railing against that doctrine for years. So if you have a case where your client's rights are being terminated or being endangered because they're a victim of domestic violence, where the child's not the victim as well, feel free to contact me. I have briefed that issue, and I think it's a really important one that needs to be addressed. So we have another great question about, can supervised parenting time be detrimental to the child, especially when it's an extended period of supervised parenting time? And what is the fact that the parent, what does it say to the child, the fact that they are only allowed to see their parent in a supervised context? Can we talk about that a little bit?
I mean, I think there does come a point where it would be detrimental to the child, and Arlene can probably speak more on this over what's the longest period of time she's worked with a certain family. But I think in general, the goal should be to normalize parenting time and move out of supervised parenting time, maybe into sandwich visits where you supervise in the beginning, and then the parent will go on his or her own with the child for a few hours, then come back so you can do a welfare check, make sure there's been no issues and that everything seems to have gone well. But I do think that there would come a time where it's bad for the child. The whole point is to make sure the child's safe and hopefully rehabilitate a relationship.
Okay, so true. It has to surround around a trust. So what happens is, if it goes on for too long, there's a trust issue. And they feel that, if a person like me is involved for too long, the longest that I saw, I had a case was 2.5 years. And they was more dependent upon me than they were on their parent. And it became an issue. And it was because of, outside circumstances, where I was with the father versus the mother, and it became a very big trust issue with the other parent. And I think that if you allow the parent that you are supervising, if you give them the tools to work with, and you show that the child or children that the parent is really trying to work toward a common goal, and that's the tools that you give them, they will then work together in as a team. And then you give them a series of goals to work toward together. And it's like put your toes in the water. It's a series of steps and goals to work toward together. And you work together as a team. It's a team process. And I think that that's something that you have to figure out slowly and figure out together. As we all know, every case is different. And every case is a different time period. And it can be, you're given a certain amount of time, and it can be increased or decreased as we figure it out together. But I think that we have to work with each parent as an individual and each child or children as individuals. And sometimes it is increased because of the certain levels of severity. But I think that if a person in my position stays around too long, there's a breach in trust.
And to Elizabeth Silverman was one that asked that question. And to her point, I remember in the O'Brien versus D'Annunzio case, when the Court of Appeals made its decision, it's since been overturned by the Supreme Court, but in Judge Gleischer's dissenting opinion, she made a comment about how the children in that case were, I think, teenagers. And she's like, what does it say to these teenagers? It basically says it loud and clear that something is horribly wrong with my mother, because I'm not allowed to have parenting time with her, or my parenting time is supervised. And there was obviously issues with reunification, I think, in that case. But at the same time, there was a message being clearly telegraphed to a teenager, which is different than a younger child.
Sure.
A younger child's not going to maybe look at it the same way or understand.
Well, they can't express themselves the same way.
Yeah. So I think that was a really interesting observation that Judge Gleischer made. So let's talk a little bit. Now we have Arlene here, who's obviously been a supervisor. I would like to hear a little bit more about the context. Was it like, do you do supervision at a specific location, or do you meet people in their homes? Because I'm like, really don't know how it works, but there's lots of other types of people who supervise. And I think Michelle maybe can share some examples of that aren't just like a paid third-party supervisor, like what Arlene does. So first, Arlene, is there anything more you want to share with us about like how your supervisions work? Like how they get, you already told us how they get set up by the court, and you're told basically what time to go, but you're actually going to somebody's house, or are you going to a facility? Okay.
Both, all the above.
Yeah.
So it's very important that, first of all, that there's a comfort level, that the kids are not afraid, that they feel that they are, that the fear factor is diminished. So many times when they're younger kids, to have it in a comfort at the home of, that they've already been to, whether it's the father's house or a family member's house, they're already walking to a place of comfort. So if it's a younger child, I like to do it in their home or their father or mother's home that I'm supervising. We go to a place where, a location where there's a quiet room, where we always have to start with or have some time where there's communication, not always play, because I like to watch or witness how the parent communicates with their child or children. It's really important to hear their communication skills, because I'm not always going to be there to monitor how they speak to their children. And there has to be respect. You want to hear their parenting skills, how they talk to them, how they communicate with respect and love, and, with in terms of whether they use in terms of endearment or not. So it's not always playtime. There's learning, there's teaching time, there's time for education and teaching time. So we have with fun and with playtime, however, depending upon the age group, there's always time to have quiet, communication time. So we try to incorporate all different levels of the location that we go to, that there's a variety of time to have, family time. So that's what I do. So yes, many, many times it's at the family home or at a library or an activity place, but in the activity place, there's also a room, an offshoot room where they can have, time to talk about school or, what they did over the weekend, or if they had, an activity that they can, express or communicate with their parent, and they can have, back and forth communication.
Okay, Michelle?
I was gonna say, I had a question for Arlene. Just how do you decide when to take a back seat and when you need to intervene? And how do you go about intervening between the parent and the children?
That's a great question. So there are many times that I remain quiet and observe, and that's an excellent question. And so there are many times that throughout the session I remain silent. But if I see that the kids are showing any kind of anxiety or fear or confusion, or I feel that the parent is being inappropriate or saying things that are not appropriate or are combative, or the kids are feeling, with any kind of anxiety, that's where I will step in. And there are times after, and I set the tone. I set the goals, I set the tone in advance with the parent, and I meet with both parents before I start the sessions to explain what a supervisor does. I also meet with the kids beforehand, so I introduce myself. So that I diminish some of the anxiety beforehand. I tell them what I do, who I am, what I've done, the history of who I am and what I've done in the past. So I'm not a stranger when I walk in right away. And so if there's an opportunity that I don't want to interrupt what's going on in the process of the session, I also call the parent afterwards to explain this should have been done this way, or could have been done this way or that way. And then we try to, correct it, every time thereafter. And I said, you did it, I would do positive reinforcement as well. So there's opportunity to go back and forth with dialogue. But many times I'm in the background. And I give them, as I said, goals are really important to establish right away. And I find out what their goals are and what their focus is and what they want to work on as well. It's not a real comfortable position for them, to have a virtual stranger in their midst, in their home, is not really comfortable. So we try to maintain a level of comfort as well, having a virtual stranger in their home or around them. But after a very brief time period, I'm no longer a stranger. I'm not intimidating. I've done this way too long to be an intimidating force. So it becomes a very free flowing thing where we work together in tandem with one another.
So there's a lot more questions, but Michelle, I want to make sure you didn't have anything you wanted to add at this point.
I didn't.
Okay, so I have another question, and we have a couple audience questions as well. Have either of you worked on a case where the supervision's happening in a room with a two-way mirror, so that the supervisor is not in the same room, just observing from afar?
I have.
Arlene has not, Michelle has. And do you have any thoughts about why that was? I mean, one, is it better or worse to do it that way? Is it more artificial or gives them more of a chance to be themselves?
I think it's more artificial just by nature, because if that's how the parenting time is, then it's clearly taking place indoors at an
facility.
Facility. So you're limited by what you can do and where you can go. You're put into this room with toys, and you could bring your own stuff, bring your own toys, bring your own food for the children, and try to make it fun and different each time. But in and of itself, just because of the location, it's not that, it doesn't feel as normal and fluid as, if you could just go with somebody like Arlene into the community, into the neighborhood, and go play in a playground, and Arlene could take a back seat and sort of just watch and observe. That would be a lot more fluid and natural.
And Arlene, are you taking notes while this is happening, or are you kind of just keeping observations, then write it down later?
I do not take notes while I'm there. I take notes right after.
Okay.
I take that back. I have taken notes if I need to write down words that were shared or something that I found, very upsetting or something I wanted to write down a quote. I have written it down, but normally it's right after the session, I take down my report.
So that's
I don't
actually
forget
relevant to
anything.
one of our audience questions. They wanted to know if Arlene, if you've ever been called to testify in a case, and in
I
the
have.
alternative, have you ever felt compelled to contact the judge? I don't know if you are allowed to contact the judge. I'm not sure how that works actually.
I have testified on a couple of cases.
Mhm.
And I have the opportunity and the privilege to, I have very good, I should say I am very lucky that I have great relationships with family law attorneys, and I'm very grateful for that. So whoever is on the call that knows me, I thank you very much. So I feel very comfortable reaching out to all of you that have called me, and I so appreciate all of you. So if there's ever an issue, I feel very comfortable reaching out to you to express my gratitude and concerns. So there's never been a time that I did not feel comfortable expressing my concerns, if there are any, or to express the fact that we are moving forward and we should figure out our next steps.
But and to that end, how do you
do that with the judges as well?
Yeah, how do you express your concerns? Is it by filing a report that the judge will see,
So,
or?
All of my reports go straight to the attorneys, plural. I send it first to the attorney that has contacted me to start the case going, to start the supervision. And many times the opposing attorney gets CC'd. I do not hold back, with permission from the attorney, to talk to them as well. It's open. I mean, I'm an open book. I mean, I don't want to hide anything, because I think that can only enhance the case. It can only benefit both clients, both parents, to work. And I keep using the word team. It is a team effort. If many times the parents are not working hand in hand with one another, whatever it might be, whatever the case may, as I said, every case is different. You don't know, it may be contentious, there might be resentment, there be anger, that whatever it might be, it's typically it's not peaceful. So if you have attorneys that can be the mediators, that can be the people that are helping coach them, and me as the middle person that's helping mediate the process and help to move them forward, and work with the kids, work with the attorneys, work with the judges, work with their doctors, their therapists. All of us work as a team. I talk to their other therapists. As long as they sign off that I can speak to them freely, I speak to their teachers, their therapists, their doctors. There's forms that we sign off on together that I can speak freely to them as well, as long as documents are signed up properly. So we all work in tandem with one another.
Before we switch gears, I have I think a couple questions for Michelle, to take it out of the context of supervision that Arlene has experienced. Have you worked on cases where perhaps a family member is a supervisor, or even the other parent? And can you share some thoughts about how that works and whether it's works well or not?
So I've worked on cases where maybe the party's parent will supervise the child's grandparents on both sides. I had cases where it was the parent who was being supervised, it was their own parents, or it was their soon-to-be ex-in-laws supervising the parenting time. And I have another one where the spouse is the parent, is the supervisor. And, it can work out, and it can also not work out, is what I would say. It could put that relative in an uncomfortable position, especially if it's a parent seeing something that their child's doing that they feel like is inappropriate, or maybe they feel like their child really isn't capable of parenting, and then they want to get out. It's hard to get out of that spot. Or it could be or to the flip side, they don't want to get out, they're covering. And then the other parent's concerned, can we really trust this person to be a supervisor?
Right.
Sometimes it can get a little bit heated with figuring out the timing when to supervise, because it's people close to you. But it also, on the positive side, I think it provides more of a normal setting for the child. I think it could be confusing to the children too, if it's the parents supervising. Why are my parents still together? I thought they're getting divorced. I don't understand. Why is mommy supervising daddy, or the other way around?
Yeah.
But it does allow the kids to be outside in a normal environment.
In the context of a family member supervising, is it often because they don't want to pay for an outside supervisor, or they want to have more parenting time than it's really feasible to have with an outside supervisor?
I haven't seen it really necessarily because of the cost, but more because the schedule, they want to try to figure out more time. And also because I have a few cases that I could think of off the top of my head where both parents didn't want an institutional provider or somebody who the children didn't know. They felt like it would be more organic if it was a relative.
Okay, got it. So we do have several related questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with one. I'm going to read it because it's from an anonymous attendee. This person has a case, and it's been more than 2 years of supervised parenting time because the supervised parent has not admitted any responsibility for wrongdoing, which was apparently assaulting the 4-year-old child. The Michigan Parenting Time Guidelines suggest that until there is acknowledgement of responsibility, the perpetrator is not going to benefit from counseling. Therefore, there's no assurance that it's safe to remove the supervision. Any comments about that scenario?
So, I mean, what I've seen, it sounds like it's probably an abuse or neglect case. When in my experience with abuse and neglect cases, there's usually a service plan. And I will say I have not done abuse and neglect in Michigan, so I can't speak to how it works in the state of Michigan. But from New York, there's usually a service plan laid out for the parents, and they have to follow that service plan. And as they follow the service plan, their parenting time would increase, the supervision would decrease, and they would move forward, hopefully towards reuniting with their child and having, overnight parenting time. So if there was a case where it had been 2 years and the parent hadn't followed that service plan and didn't engage in counseling, there would come a point where the agency, Children's Services, would move to terminate that parent's rights.
Right.
It won't let this just go on forever. And I think it was 15 out of 22 months. So at 2 years, that would be a stopping point.
He'll be terminated, correct.
Say that again. After 22 months, the
agency would move forward with terminating that parent's rights.
Oh, right. In the context
be
of the
terminated.
CPS case. Yeah. Right. And related to that question, and I think it was a custody case because the person who's asking the question referenced the Michigan Parenting Time Guidelines. Now, I was not aware that there was that provision in the Parenting Time Guidelines, but I did want to point out, because we're talking about the child welfare cases as well, that there was a case from the Court of Appeals where in Ray Blakeman, it was a published decision from, I would say 3 years ago, where the father would not admit to injuring an unrelated child, and until the father would admit to having committed that crime, the judge would not allow him to return home, and that decision was overturned. So that's really interesting about the Michigan Parenting Time Guidelines. I want to check that out to see if there's some sort of correlation about that, if there's a problem with forcing somebody to admit, unless they've already admitted to doing it, and you're referring to admitting responsibility and taking responsibility for what you've already admitted to doing, which is, I think, different than the Blakeman case where the father denied having committed the acts that resulted in the other child's injuries. Okay, and then we have another question. Okay, this is kind of relevant to this too. What is the criteria for determining when supervision is no longer necessary? Obviously, in the child welfare case, we're talking about, hey, if it's still going on for 22 months, we're going to, and I have somebody you're on a video now, everybody can see you. 22 months are going to seek to terminate parental rights. But what about in the family law context? How do we know whether it's time to end supervision?
I actually find that supervision tends to or can continue longer in a custody and a divorce case than an abuse and neglect case. I think that there is more stringent guidelines in the abuse and neglect world for moving on and ending the case, as oftentimes there's just one parent in a lot of those cases, in my experience. So it would naturally move forward quicker. Whereas in a custody case or a divorce case, you have a parent on the other side constantly fighting back and saying, I don't want unsupervised. I don't think they're ready yet. So I don't know that there's a clear answer other than analyzing the best interest factors and seeing where the children are at and how the court feels parenting time would go moving forward, and looking at if there's still a risk to the child.
Arlene, do you have any thoughts about when it should end, or do we know of any criteria to determine whether it should end?
As I said, I don't have a legal background, but I do agree with, what Michelle said. And I said I had a case that went well into 2.5 years. If the children are ever at risk, that's when the attorneys assess whether it should go longer. The safety is paramount. That's what they go by, and it's by the records and the reports that the supervisors write, and we're in constant contact with all legal parties, and as I said, whoever we speak to as the professionals, we're all working together. So it's the safety of the children that is that we work so hard to protect. So if it does go longer, it's all parties that are in agreement.
Well, and let's talk about the converse. When are you making recommendations like, I think this parent has benefited and I don't see anything inappropriate, like whether you don't see anything inappropriate, you feel that the safety of the child is fine, that you don't need to have supervision anymore. Let's talk about how do we end it?
Oh, I've definitely done that.
Yeah.
Where I feel that we are good to go, and the child or the children are no longer at risk. And I feel that I can finally step away and reintegration can take place in a very safe manner. Absolutely. And it's a joy to say that, our job is done. And there is a time where there are many times where I have gone back and checked in or talked to the attorneys to make sure everything is go, because they keep in touch with I step away, but they're in touch with their attorneys and make sure that things are going, smoothly. And if I need to, do any kind of, check-ins or help or guidance support. But there's been times where, they've given them, X time period to do supervision, and they've either met it or it's been, just short of the time period that was given to them, where they have really worked, effort, tried so hard to be a good parent and shown their kids that they're first and foremost in their lives. And that's when the kids feel that they are, so important. And the trust factor is there, and the love is there, and it's they work toward a common goal.
And go ahead, Michelle.
I think you also have to look at the reason that supervision was put in place for why it was put in place at the beginning. So if the parent is a drug addict that has an extensive drug history, but is then in rehab and has been testing negative and is clean, then that would be a reason to move forward with unsupervised time. And the supervisor hasn't observed anything during the parenting time to make anyone think that he or she was under the influence. If a parent has significant anger management problems and was in therapy and in anger management classes, if you followed the steps to correct the behaviors that led to the supervised parenting time to start with, that would probably be a reason to expand it.
Yeah, and to
Absolutely.
go, and that goes directly to the question that was asked about, how ending the condition on parenting time. I would direct everybody to read the Cave v. Cave decision from the Court of Appeals from a few years ago, and that talks about the threshold to remove a condition on parenting time is a lot lower, a lot easier to remove that condition to pass the threshold than it is for Vidvarka or Shady v. Right. And I think what Michelle said is exactly on point, that if the parent, for example, one of the reasons they have supervised parenting time was because of a drug issue, and they've been testing clean and doing their classes and all that, that may be a basis to file that motion to remove that condition on parenting time.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
alongside the reports from the supervisor that maybe are very good, positive reports with very few, concerns being raised, or maybe no concerns being raised for a period of
Exactly.
time. Yeah. So that's would be a very helpful case to read if that's what you're contemplating. Another question is about whether either of you have any experience with supervised parenting time where there's been criminal conduct or charges specifically for viewing child pornography. I don't know that, if it's a child-related crime, that definitely would be a reason to have supervised parenting time. I'm actually would be surprised maybe that there were supervised parenting time at all. I think it would be probably suspended, but either of you have any comments about that? And Arlene, do you know, like, if somebody's been charged criminally, are you aware of like what the charges are? Do they tell you like what's happening in the case? Okay.
Yes. So before, forgive me, did you finish your?
Yep. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. I didn't want to interrupt you. So yes, before I get any kind of case, I get a whole narrative. I get a case file on why I'm being brought in, what has transpired, you know, is it a criminal case? Is it a child neglect case, abuse, drugs involved, a history of anything that has to do with the couple themselves, what happened, basically what's transpired in the past and what brought me on. And is my safety in jeopardy in any way? I mean, I must know that as well. And that's very important to me. I mean, my life has been threatened a few times. So I know the history of the case right before I start. I'm sorry, forgive me. What was
like specifically the question specifically was about the, supervised parenting time when there's criminal charges, really about conduct that was a criminal case regarding children, like viewing child pornography, for example.
Yes. So child pornography. So I did have a case. So I wanted to know, I did have a case where there was a criminal record and also pornography involved. The kids did not know that the father watched pornography while married, a lot of pornography, and it upset the wife. And she thought that the kids saw what was on his computer, what was on the TV, and so on and so forth. They did not when they were questioned by their psychiatrist and psychologist. But she thought that the husband had, issues, psychological issues, and so on and so forth. The kids did not know about it, hear about it, had no problems with it, no psychological damage. They went through 3 different evaluations. Kids always go through psychological evaluations multiple times throughout the whole process, which I think is very important to note, that they are evaluated both in school and out of school with professional psychiatrists and psychologists. And so, yes, I've had 2 cases where there was pornography involved, where the kids had no indication that there was, that is in the marital home.
Okay. Michelle?
I have not had experience with pornography cases and supervised parenting time. I did have one other thought, though, a little bit off topic right now, just in terms of when one parent might be asking for a supervised parenting time and they're asking for your client to be supervised, is you want to think about how else you can mitigate the risk short of supervision. So I know I was mentioning drug and related cases before, but maybe extensive testing and using a device like SoberLink and testing at the beginning of your parenting time and testing maybe in the morning of can mitigate any risk and take away the need for supervised parenting time if the concern is just that the parent will be drunk or high during parenting time. Well, the drunk, that SoberLink will help that.
Yeah, right. Okay. So switching gears again, there's, I think, a lot of issues, and maybe it's not as big of a problem in Oakland County or east side of the state, but I feel like in anybody who's in central Michigan or on the west side of the state, I feel like there's more of an issue of finding supervisors. And I've seen a lot of cases, especially in mid-Michigan, where there's just not a lot of supervisor options available. And so the court orders supervised parenting time, and then the parent can't find a supervisor, or they can't find one that they can afford. I don't know what the going rate is, but let's just say if it's $75 an hour and the parent is indigent, well, it's a family law case. You don't get the court to pay for that, right? I don't know if either of you have comments or have anything to share about the situation where parents find themselves that they need to have supervision pursuant to a court order, but they're not able to find a supervisor or secure a supervisor.
I mean, I have not come across that, but I would hope that there'd be some agencies out there that would do it on a sliding scale so that doesn't become a problem. Of course, you don't want a parent to the court to turn around and say 2 years later, well, you haven't seen your child in 2 years, you haven't had parenting time, you have no more relationship with your child, you shouldn't have rights, if it was really outside of their control just because of the funds.
And one of our colleagues is saying there are no options in Southwest Michigan. Yes, and that's my understanding as well. Closest options to South Bend, Indiana. So it's really it's really a shame because it seems like that all the people I hear of, and I've gotten names of supervisors, and Michelle, you had a list of supervisors like Arlene, and they're all on the east side of the state, which is great for all those cases on the east side of the state. But if you need supervised parenting time that's not virtual, it's going to be really a lot harder in other parts of the state. Arlene?
So yes, so thank you. So when there's been issues with finding a supervisor, whether in a home, people have also asked their clergy to supervise. I don't know if someone has thought about clergy.
That's a great
as
idea.
well.
Yeah, that's a great
So,
idea. And I wanted to point out in another published opinion, it was the Martin v. Martin case that came out probably again 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a case about parental alienation, but the mother who was alleged to be the alienating parent was the one that appealed, and the case was affirmed. The decision of the judge was affirmed, but the Court of Appeals was concerned with the fact that even though mom was only getting supervised parenting time, she actually hadn't got any supervised parenting time for a long period of time. And I think the issue in that case was that she might have owed a supervisor, this was on the west side of the state, she might have owed the supervisor some money, or there was some issue where something wasn't able to be resolved between her and the supervisor. Therefore, the supervision wasn't happening, which meant she wasn't getting any parenting time at all. And and the Court of Appeals expressed concern about the fact that if you have these situations where the parent, for whatever reason, is not able to exercise the supervised parenting time, that's was concerning to the Court of Appeals in the context of a family law case. So I wanted to see if, first of all, if Arlene, do you have any tips for us attorneys that we can, like, as if we have to prepare a client for supervised parenting time, they're the parent who's going to be supervised. Any tips that you think we should convey to our clients to help them succeed and achieve, the end of supervised parenting time? Anything you can say that we can share with our clients?
For the ones being supervised,
Yes.
or the ones whose children or child are going
Let's
to?
do both. Let's do both, but let's start with the parent who is being supervised. If I represent the parent who's being supervised and I want to prepare them for this new reality that they're going to be in for some period of time, what words of advice do you think I should tell them so that they will have the best chance of succeeding in getting that to end, I guess?
Okay, so again, that's a great question. And I think that our role together to succeed is to let them know. A lot of times they think that this is a punishment to them. It's not. It's to help them to succeed. They look at this as the other parent, or the parent that's not being supervised, is a better parent, or they're winning, or their kids are going to love them more, or so on. It's a contest. It's not. You're there to help that parent regain the trust of their children, the love of their child or children. It's to help them be a better person, a better parent, a better individual. And this parent is going to regain and have reintegration to have a family unit, again, separate from a marital home. The kids are going to have two different homes, and they're not used to that. They're used to one family home, and they're going to, in every case, they're going to say, this is not my house. I like my other house better. You don't have this in your house. You don't have that in your house. There's always a constant comparison from one house to the other. And it's a constant battle until it's not. And you have to help them figure out ways of speaking so that it's not a constant battle, a constant comparison. And this is something that you have to work, that it's not a contest. You are a parent. The other person is a parent, and you have to work to teach them to be secure and stable. And remember, they are the father, they are the mother, just like the other one. And you have to bear in mind that it's separate. You don't speak ill of the other parent, not ever. You don't chastise the other parent. You don't speak ill of the other parent, not ever. And when there's parental alienation, that is not okay. And if they hear that in the other house and they bring that into their house, that's where I step in. That's not okay. Their kids are not pawns. They're not tug of war. They're not in a tug of war game. That's not okay because they can't process that. Right?
Right.
And that's what they say. I like mom more. I like dad more. I like this better. I like that better. And then it's a no win-win. Okay.
So
It's two separate homes, two separate parents, two separate everything. And they have to learn to be okay and safe and happy and feel loved in both homes. And that, if that's your job, that's my job, that's the mediator's job, that's all of our jobs to make this parent feel that he or she has to work with these kids and keep them focused. And the continuity is very important. Consistency is very important. Trust is very important. Truth is very important. Constant. You have to tell the truth.
Right. It's
not easy. And you have to maintain a level of being calm. It's not easy because the kids kids of all ages are going to bait you and they're going to frustrate you. And they're going to say, I like, the other house better, leave me alone. They're going to make that parent, their blood boil.
I do have a comment what you said, Arlene, because you talked about, you always have to tell the truth. And one of the problems we have in the family law cases and the child welfare cases too, that the parent is not allowed to talk about the court case. And, how do you, exactly. And if the supervised parenting time is because the court has ordered it, whether you agree with it or not, how do you explain to the child why they're in this situation where they're only being able to spend time with the parent on a limited basis, or sometimes in an artificial setting, like at a facility?
Okay. So that's my role as well. So when they know that, there's a separation or a divorce or whatever, and I will help that parent say the reason why you're here with dad or mom for X period of time, a couple hours or whatever, is to work toward having, the time of even, or you'll be sleeping over at a certain amount of time, or, having half, but right now, because of certain, you can't say the reason why, because, dad did X, Y, and Z, or mom did, mom is claiming whatever, but you tweak it and you say, I am working toward, because I'm your dad and I'm your mom and I love you. You use the word love because I care, because you're so important to me. You use words that they understand and bring some comfort and bring some security and stability because of you. And that you can see their shoulders come down and they feel like they're valued and they feel like they're important. Because of you, I am working toward blank, blank, blank.
Mm-hmm.
You don't say, because I am, like your mom says I'm worthless, or your dad says I'm worthless, or this or that, or the court thinks I need to do blank, blank, blank. That's something that I know, he knows, they know. But what the kids need to hear is, because I'm seeing you for 8 hours out of the week, and I am working so hard, so diligently in those 8 hours, we're going to have fun and we're going to talk. And I want to hear all about school and baseball and football and soccer and blah, blah, blah. This is our time. And when they hear that they are valued and they are loved and they are cared about, they're like, hey, what if there's parental alienation and there's things that they're hearing in the other house, or they're hearing the same thing, it resonates with them, right? Or it makes them question it, and then you can reinforce it. And the more you talk about it and the more they believe it, the calmer they'll be and the better it'll be, and the outcome will be better.
So Michelle, do you have any comments to add as to what you would tell your client who's about to be supervised during their parenting time?
Make sure, tell the truth. Listen to the supervisor. If the supervisor intervenes, I would say, don't be defensive, take it in stride. You can follow up with the supervisor after. Don't necessarily engage in a conversation in front of the children.
Mm-hmm.
And be receptive to any type of constructive criticism or feedback. and understand that this is temporary and that it's hopefully a means to an end, and that if this goes well, you will move forward and you will move to the next step.
I have one more question, and then one of the audience member has a question too. And the question from the audience is about, is there a rule or a citation for this idea that a parent can't talk to the child about the case? And I don't know that there is. I think it's just every judge I've ever heard gets mad at you. Yeah, I don't know. Are you aware of any like court rule or anything that would prevent the parent from talking about the case?
I'm not, and I know this is often a very hard concept, and it's very hard for clients to understand, especially when the children are older, because when they're older, they're aware of what's going on, but you have to try to figure out a way, like Arlene said, make it about the children, and I'm doing this because I love you, and this is why we're doing this right now, and to not get into the details. Like if it's a case about child pornography, you're not going to say to your child, oh, well, you know, your other parent's been watching child pornography all day, and that's why we don't trust that parent around you. That's obviously going to be very damaging.
So we only have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to make sure we answered the question from the converse. What tips do you have for the parent who's, you know, sending their children off to supervision with the other parent? Is there any words of advice that we can share with our clients who are not the ones being supervised?
I think you need to trust the process a little bit. You need to encourage your children, because you don't want to let them know how nervous you are. If you're the parent who's not being supervised, it's probably because you're uncomfortable with the other parent being around your children, but you don't want to pass that along to your children. And at the end of the day, if it goes well and your kids are comfortable, that's probably what's best for your children. So I think the most important thing is not to push your anxieties onto your children, and have an open line of communication with the supervisor too.
Arlene, do you have any, I don't know that you ever deal with the other parent with your job. Okay.
I do. So I ask them not to ask the kids so many questions when they come back into the car. They don't need to do verbatim what was said, what was done. I mean, I think that's very unhealthy to report back.
Right.
So that's not necessary. And I find that damaging and very unhealthy. There has to be, the kids can have a private session too.
Yeah.
The kids know that they can talk to me, and they always do. If there's ever an issue, when I meet with the other parent that is dropping the kids off, they have my number, they have my cell number, they have my email, and they can share that with the kids. And the kids have called me before, and they have discussed whatever, good or bad, with me versus with their mom or dad.
Oh, right. So that's interesting. I guess I never thought about the fact that the child might be talking directly to the supervisor in a private setting without either parent being there. Well, and of course you have the therapy training as well. And I do have one last question. I'm so sorry. This has generated so many questions from everybody, including myself. I know you have the education training to be a therapist. You did that first before you became a supervisor. But if somebody wasn't a therapist like you were, is there some kind of training that they have to go through to become a parenting time supervisor?
I believe so. I'm not sure.
I mean, you already had it. So, okay. I don't know. Michelle, do you happen to know? And maybe we'll find out if we don't know.
You know, in Oakland County, there's a list of court-appointed approved supervisors, but I don't know if they've gone through training or not. The agencies that do supervision, a lot of them are social workers. I think it's up to each agency in terms of who they hire, what their qualifications are.
I think that they have a degree in psychology, social work, counseling. So I don't know if there's a training proper, but I do know that they have a background in counseling, so to speak.
Great. And then of course, if it's a family, if it's a relative who's supervising, the chances are they probably don't have. They might, but they're supervising more because they're a relative, not because they have a certain professional background.
Although I think I've seen relatives who are like nurses or whatever, that were in a position that would be helpful for supervision. So Arlene and Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. This was amazing.
Pleasure.
We had tons of questions. I think people were very engaged with this topic, and there was just so much for me to learn personally. So I feel like I probably got more out of it than anybody else here. So thank you. And as I said in the chat, we will be circulating takeaways in a few days. that includes all the citations that we were talking about today. So don't worry, you don't have to go hunt them down unless you need it today. If it's an emergency, call my office and we probably can get them to you sooner because I know the cases. I just have to go look them up. So we'll be circulating something so you have something to look at and use when you're dealing with supervision issues. But again, thank you, Arlene and Michelle. This has been
My
fabulous.
pleasure.
Thank you, Liisa.
I'm going to stop the
Thank you
recording.
so much.